This is Carolyn Stevens lecturing on Animus as Servant to the Self, April 24th, 1989.
I'd like to start with a little theory tonight because I think I have a slightly different emphasis on understanding Animus. And so I'd like to try and tell you what that is and then answer any questions that you have about it. And we can discuss it a little bit. Briefly, I think it's very important to recognize that Animus is a name for an experience that what is general and eternal about Animus is its function in psyche, not its content. In other words, the qualities that we traditionally associate with masculinity and therefore with Animus are not everywhere and always the same. There are, of course, archetypal images of the masculine which express those more commonly held ideas about what the masculine is. Logos, for instance. There's Apollo. But for every archetypal masculine image expressing certain qualities, if we look around in the literature and don't confine ourselves to current understandings or to a single mythology, we will find a feminine archetypal image expressing the same quality. Am I making myself clear here? For instance, we're accustomed to associate earth with the feminine and sky with the masculine. But there are earth gods and sky goddesses. We're accustomed to associate Eros with the feminine and Logos with the masculine. This is one of the older ideas in Jungian thought. But there are goddesses of the word, and there are gods of love. In fact, Hillman makes a pretty persuasive case for Eros being masculine. The only problem with his argument is that he just reverses the situation. What I'm suggesting is that there is nothing inherently masculine about Logos or about sky, about war. There are goddesses of war, and not just Athena, who is the father's daughter, but goddesses in their own right of war. Inanna, for instance, celebrates her warlike qualities in a hymn in which she says, I, a warrior am I. Is there any God who can stand against me? All right, well, that illustrates my point perhaps enough. Does it make sense so far?
You're talking about these qualities being content and being either masculine or feminine.
That's right.
But then you haven't explained function as opposed to quality.
No, I'm getting to that.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah. It's hinted at in the title. I'll go into it a lot further, of course. It's also important, as perhaps what I've said implies, to recognize the levels of human reality which contribute to the creation in a given person's dreams or life of certain kinds of animus figures. The most obvious, of course, is the culture, which has said that women are, to be feminine is, and we've divided these qualities up. It's very convenient, and it has worked very well for a lot of centuries. But we're getting to a point where it doesn't work so well, and we enter this confusing area that I'm trying to say something about tonight, where it isn't by their qualities that ye shall know them. Animus is the name for an experience in a dream or in outer life, which expresses the qualities most other to the feminine ego position, the conscious female identity. Qualities most other. More other, for instance, than shadow figures are. The family plays its role in the creation of this this perception of otherness, of course, both as a carrier of the culture and as the particular experience of dynamic within the family. Some of us come from families where in the power and authority, the central power and authority, were clearly masculine. And those of us who do not are a little embarrassed about it and maybe angry at our mothers about it. Now that has very particular consequences. I mentioned that with regard to the culture, but when the primary image of power and authority is masculine, then that skews a woman's relationship to the unconscious and to the self. Later on we'll deal with some dreams and maybe a fairy tale, maybe a mythic figure that I think may help to clarify that. Because above all else, the quality most essential to the self, big S, is that authority and that power to initiate and direct transformations. What has happened in our culture, because of its particular kinds of structures, is that the self for women as often is perceived or experienced as masculine. This has some very sticky consequences for feminine development. So, important to bracket the definitions of masculine that most of us have tended to take for granted, and which are embedded in our theory, Jungian theory, the traditional Jungian theory. Bracket those definitions and look at your experience. I first began to wonder about these matters when I was in training in Zurich. That was my first training experience, first half of training, and I kept reading about logos being masculine and waiting for logos figures to appear in my dreams, and they didn't. What did appear in my dreams were very earthy figures. And that, for me, has been the most significant animus experience. So I had to, ask questions. In my own mullings for a very long while. But eventually I come to the position that I'm trying to elucidate tonight. That it's risky and it delays your journey if you expect logos to be masculine, and if you identify your own intellectual capacities as masculine women, or if you did as feminine. What this does is to cut us off from the full experience of integration. You can't gracefully deploy a quality which is contrasexual. You can't feel at home with it. You can't feel clear and comfortable in its expression. You're always a little off base. Since we do have a man in class tonight, it really is also true, I believe, that as long as a man identifies his nurturing qualities, for instance, or his material, sensual reality as feminine, he's going to have a hard time living it, owning it. The efforts that are being made now by some men to assume a more active and early part in child rearing run into difficulties because their families, their co-workers, their wives even, don't feel comfortable about this kind of masculinity. And yet, as I said, there is an earth fathering which is archetypally imaged, although not very prominently at all in our culture. Arthur Coleman and his wife have written a nice book about that. It used to be called Earth Father, Sky Father, but it's been reissued and it's got another name. The bookstore lady will know. So, here we grow up in a particular family, in our particular culture, making certain assumptions, which we don't even know that we're making because it's like the air that we breathe until we begin to notice that certain qualities are masculine and others are inherently, intrinsically, archetypally, if you think in those terms, feminine or masculine. And a lot of what gets repressed in a woman, besides the unease I mentioned in actually speaking her mind or fighting for what she believes in, unless it happens to be in the cause of others, that's okay. Or moving aggressively to get what she wants. These qualities, and qualities like rage, greed, and lust, are likely to appear in her dreams in masculine form. Any questions so far? Okay, yes.
Are you going to elaborate? I caught a hint. You said that women get into difficulty when the primary authority is male, and that can lead to a situation where a woman views the self as masculine.
Yes.
And are you going to? I'm having trouble imagining in a concrete sort of way how that would manifest itself. Are you going to talk about that?
Well, sure. I'll give you a few examples right now. There's a great popularity now in a book and a 12-step program based on the book, Women Who Love Too Much. It's a phenomenon that I'm sure you all may have observed. I certainly have, time and again in my practice. A woman who is unable to give up a relationship with a man that is nevertheless, obviously to her even, destructive. When you are defined in terms of your relationship, then it's pretty tough to think of giving it up. See what else. The idealization that occurs when when we fall in love tends to, in the extreme, carry the qualities of the Godhead, the masculine Godhead. Omnipotence. Now, this is not in our heads, you understand. They act this way. They're supposed to be able to do anything. Omniscience. They're supposed to know. Now, this is quite a burden for a man to carry. A human being. And but it's pretty intoxicating too, of course. But the difficulties, of course, always begin when these qualities are perceived not, in fact, to belong to the man. Now, he may have been trying to claim them, encouraged by her, and encouraged by the culture. Stating it in the extreme, omnipotence, omniscience. And also a certain entitlement. An entitlement to deference, to service. I may be sounding a little old-fashioned, but then I'm 62 years old. I still do encounter it in young women. Which borrows heavily from our religious understanding of the relationship to deity. Self-sacrifice, service to the other. Now, I'm not saying these are bad qualities, understand. But if you feel, if you find yourself obliged or constrained to expend these qualities upon a human being, great indeed will be your rage when he doesn't live up to the projection. Now, I mentioned the authority and the power of the self. The other another central quality, I guess we're familiar with that concept of self, are we? It's a real tricky one. I'd hate to define it in 25 words or less, but if you've been coming to these classes, you have some feel for it, I think. Another very central function of the self, the relation of ego to self, is that since it contains the potential for personal individuation, it defines the possibilities of personal development. Ultimately, the self and only the self, should do that. What you are intrinsically, and what the journey of individuation is about developing, is something that develops between ego and self. And to the degree that it is what we learn about how we are defined by the culture, which is not at one with that potential, to that degree we are in a struggle. And move more fearfully on the road toward individuation than we might otherwise. So, as many writers have observed, I guess maybe beginning most notably with Simone de Beauvoir in her book, The Second Sex, the feminine in our culture is defined by its difference from the masculine. Robin Morgan, was it? I think wrote a nice book called Femininity, in which, if it was Robin, she talks about how hard we all have to work, men and women, to enact our gender, to convince people of our gender, with what anxiety we scrutinize our appearance and our behavior so as to be appropriately feminine or masculine. While our attention and energy is engaged in those ways, we are blocked from listening openly and honestly to the messages from the self. So self-definition is a gift of the self as opposed to definition by the other or by the culture, which is what we mostly have experienced. Every culture does that. I'm not just picking on patriarchy. Every culture has its definitions. But we've entered an era wherein, in our piece of the world anyway, those definitions are open to question, and the ground that can support us while we question is an awareness of the Jungian self. Not the Jungian self, but the self as introduced to us by the writings of Jung. Some people have thought and written in terms of an androgynous self, but I have a quarrel with that. Largely because of that power imbalance that I spoke of. Power and authority being vested by all of us, primarily, and most commonly in the masculine. An androgynous self that's made up of a masculine and feminine pair is going to be lopsided. Hillman wrote about that, too, in Revisioning Psychology, I think. Lopsided. They have to be co-creative if two figures are to image the self. Co-equal, equally powerful, equally authoritative, co-creative. Now, I'm going to tell you a fairy tale. I'm looking around to see who's familiar with what I do. Here she comes again, the old woman in the woods. But from a slightly different slant this time, maybe with emphasis upon how the animus figures in this dream function, in fact. And here comes the business about function, as servants to the self, that is, as forces which lead us deeper toward an encounter with the self. This is the primary function of the animus and of the anima. And that is what is, I think, everywhere the case. Even those figures that appear to be negative and attacking. Now I'll illustrate that from the tale. Well, it's a Grimm's fairy tale called The Old Woman in the Wood. And this is how it goes. A young girl is traveling, young servant girl, traveling with the family that she serves in a carriage, and they enter the deep wood. And when they get to the deepest, darkest part of the wood, the carriage is set upon by a band of robbers. Enter the Animus. And everyone is killed except the girl, who somehow or other has the presence of mind to jump out of the carriage and hide behind a tree. They overlook her, it seems. They kill everybody else and carry off the wealth of the family. And now she finds herself alone and lost. Now all the structures that she depended upon for definition of self are gone. She was a servant to the family. That's not an uncommon experience for women of today. She was defined and contained by her relationship to the family. Kind of an anonymous family, kind of an archetypal family, perhaps. But that's gone. And she has lost the path as well. And the way they came in is no longer visible. You can't go back once these things occur. Well, what about these robbers? In what way could we imagine them to be serving the self? Anybody got any ideas? Yeah. You betcha.
They free her from her family.
They force her out of that, yeah. And one could regard it as freedom. I had a dream once, early in my analytical work, my own analytical work, in which I was a prisoner in a structure on a busy thoroughfare. And there was a man outside, and I was hysterical. I was beating on the walls. I was, And he said, listen, you have to quiet down, or I'm not going to divorce you. And I said, that's odd to my analyst. He said, could it mean freedom? So there was that movement there in my own dream, but here it's a lot more frightening. I mean, he does appear in the traditional fairy tale role of sort of the rescuer, but not by marrying, by divorcing in my dream. But the young woman is terrified. Now, it's commonly noted how often the dreams of women, especially perhaps early in their analytical work, or at some other periods, I've had them at other periods when something needed to be forced because I was not seeing it or I was resisting it or whatever. I was afraid to go with it. These murderous, destructive figures are, in fact, breaking her loose from her old patterns, and they're also expressing something that it's very unlikely, or some things it's very unlikely she has felt free to express in the conscious world. murderous rage, and greed, and taking. So here are figures that do not support the family or nurture the family, they destroy it, which are not giving, but taking. Really deep shadow stuff for many women. Charles Gilligan, is it? In a different voice, a book about the development of ethical position in women and girls, found that, from whatever source, girls and women tended to locate the decision in the context of the consequence for people, rather than deducing a decision by appeal to a general principle. And the development that they had to move toward was including themselves in the number of people whose well-being was to be taken into account when moral decisions were made. Tricky. Well, okay. Now, any questions or anything you'd like to discussion you'd like to? Yes.
She was mentioning a dream she had earlier about an airplane. She was in a plane with a man.
Yes.
I had a dream where I was in a plane with
Wait,
a woman.
excuse me just a minute. We weren't all together. So would you mind telling that again?
Oh, well, it was, it's not just the whole thing, it's just in context with other dreams. But at this point, it was very brief. The plane was there, modern plane, small, two-seater. And I was waiting for the plane to start. I was just sitting there waiting. And the male figure said, who is going to fly this plane? He was leaving it up to me to make the decision. I guess I didn't, clarify.
That was quite clear. But it brought to mind my dream where I was in a plane, a small two-seater, with a woman who was piloting the plane. And she was very much in control in some very risky situations. And I was wondering if she could be the Animus figure. Even though it's feminine, she was the one who was most other to what I am in that particular case.
Yeah. My guess would be that you had moved closer to the assumption of that kind of authority than you had been before. My guess would be that if it had been a male pilot, that would have meant more other.
Oh, I see.
Further from seeming less likely to you that you could do such a thing. That if you see a woman do it, all the talk about role models is not without basis. And here is an aspect of yourself that has assimilated qualities, that expresses qualities that we have tended to regard as masculine. So you're on the verge of.
So then you can't say that an Animus figure could be represented by the feminine.
No, I go the other direction. Animus is masculine. Image. Masculine image. But it carries qualities that are not archetypally masculine, or exclusively masculine, I should say, are not exclusively masculine. But they appear in masculine form because they are further from the conscious position than if it were a female figure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you made a statement that I'm not sure if I understood.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about that the young girl growing up identifies that the power is either masculine or feminine, the power structure comes
Mm-hmm.
from, and that most of us have had the male power structure,
Mm-hmm.
and some have had the female power structure. And you said did you say that those girls are mad at the mother?
Often.
What? Can you explain that?
Not inevitably, but often. Somebody was asking me about this reversal possibility too. Yeah, there you are. Sometimes girls, it's a little bit like the attitude we have toward dark power figures in our female figures in our dreams, the witch. The girl sees that power in the mother sometimes, as the culture sees it, as ball busting, as depriving the father, as taking something that rightfully belongs to him. This isn't inevitable. I mean, it doesn't always work this way, but not infrequently. And depending upon how the mother deploys that power with regard to the girl, she may or may not come to appreciate that. And I want to say, too, out of the discussion that you and I had, that I feel there's a difference between strength and power. These are tricky words, but there are a lot of strong women who don't see themselves, or would be horrified to see themselves as powerful, do their best to disguise their power, and certainly would not assume authority. Again, because this is risky in our culture, you know. There's caricatures of the strong woman, the battle axe, henpecked husbands. This is again a little bit out of the past, maybe, but I don't know. So, if this mother who is stronger than the father, more powerful in the family than the father, is seen as persecutory by the daughter, then she's angry. Perhaps this mother is not a nurturing mother, or perhaps she is a possessive mother. The girl has to fight against her. Perhaps the girl finds tenderness and nurture in the father. But it's an awkward spot for everybody in that family in our culture. Many strong women deploy a lot of their energy preserving the appearances, because they themselves are embarrassed to be seen as the power in the family. Who wears the pants in this family, after all? That kind of thing. So they may be strong, but not overtly powerful. Now, that doesn't mean that power isn't operating. You know, like the witch in the woods, it can be much more dangerous and binding on members of the family if the woman is unconscious of it herself or denies its legitimacy. It's a real tough spot to be in. Many daughters don't realize that the seemingly overpowered father picked that wife for damn good reasons, you know, and the mother is seen as destructive, and she may be, especially if she has to hide it. See, hidden power gets angry. It can't stand up tall and assert itself. It carries an anger at those who don't do what they're supposed to do. You know, that kind of thing. Yes.
I sometimes get muddled by the distinction between animus and shadow. And you mentioned earlier that in your definition of animus, it was more other
than shadow.
Okay,
again, this is kind of an arbitrary thing, but the rule of thumb is that if it's a same-sex figure, it's shadow. And is likely to be closer to the consciousness. It may be positive shadow. That's a way out of, or if potent enough, it may be an image of the self, this same-sex figure. Animus is a name for the masculine appearance in the dream. Anima is a name for feminine appearance.
But in a sense, both serve the same function as you
Yes.
find the function. The animus is bringing you closer to self.
Yes. But because he lives deeper in the woods, so to speak, he's more at home in these less traveled realms, often. Sometimes a woman will dream of approaching a rickety bridge or a body of water, and walk out on the pier, and she's supposed to swim to the other side, and is afraid to jump in, and the man she's with jumps right in. Now she feels safer, and she follows. Can lead the way.
Jung defines the ego as circling around the self, just as the earth circles around the sun. I always thought that the ego was between the conscious and the unconscious. So,
Well, again, these words are real
part of the
tricky. Circle around, like, Well, it's not between, well, I don't know. It's also called the center of consciousness, the ego. It's called another complex, among others, the ego complex. I haven't thought of it as between. I'm not sure how that would be.
Well, maybe I'm expressing it differently. I'm getting mixed up with the conscious self and the ego.
Ego tends to be regarded as the center of the conscious self. Okay? I like to think of it as
the center of the conscious self. But the self is
big S.
the center of both the conscious and
Oh, right. Okay, the self, big S, is the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. Jung doesn't make a careful distinction between self as it applies to the individual and something cosmic. And von Franz says something about it being at once the most personal and intimate and at the same time opening out into the Godhead, something like that, into infinity, the self. It can't be.
He really doesn't go that far. He stops at the threshold because science will not permit him to go beyond. Because, in the two essays, I will not go beyond, because at that time, the time that he wrote that, people would not venture into talking about the soul. So actually, the self is the soul. He would not venture beyond.
Well, but he also said, somewhere else, he said so many things, that the self-image is indistinguishable from a God image when it's personified. It's like that for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, there's a line in there, I found God in myself and I loved her. I loved her fiercely. That the self and the images of deity for Jung are often indistinguishable one from another. And he wrote an essay about Christ as a self-image. I think it's in Psychology and Religion, I'm not sure. But I did want to say a bit about the more fortunate situation, I think, where the girl, maybe the daughter, maybe with some unease, nevertheless is strengthened by the fact of her mother's strength. My parents fought all the time, but they were an even match. Yeah. It makes a difference. Of course, when I married at 18, I was going to do it all different. I wasn't going to be mean like my mother. I had all this empathy for the poor man. we do that sort of thing. But my father was not a poor man. They were well matched. There used to be huge battles in the large extended family, and I always felt the men were overmatched. And so my heart went out to the poor things. But I think that's dangerous, for them as well as for us. All that business about men as little boys is terrible. Well, yes.
Can I ask what difference it makes in a dream, if any, if the animus appears as an animal, such as the dove, or in a dream I had where a stag brought me into the forest?
Oh, beautiful.
Or if it's a figure of a person.
Yes, I would say that it does. It is different in that with the stag you are much closer to the archetypal level.
And a dove flew above the two.
Wow. Yeah.
So I was very interested
in the dove, yes. Well, the stag, that's an image of the god in the earth religions. Cernunnos, the horned god in Celtic mythology. The satyrs and so forth. Yeah, the stag is a potent. I think, in fact, it's an image of Christ in some.
That's how I took it. For no reason.
Oh yes, a reason, I'm sure. Yeah. There's a Christian hymn called "The Lord of the Dance." Are you familiar with that? I think that's a very, very old hymn. I think that they were talking about an older God, and they adapted it to Christ. "I am the Lord of the dance," said he. "I live in you, you live in me." That fits the Christian mythology, but it also fits the mythology of another god, Dionysus, whom I thought I would mention a bit. Here is a god of the earth, a god probably more ancient than the Olympians, called the god of women, considered by the heroic Greeks effeminate. Men who participated in his rites wore garments like women, often. The Bacchae by Euripides is a very powerful statement about the role and the power of Dionysus at a time when the patriarchal structures were pretty firmly in place. Dionysus remained the god of women, and women largely participated in his rites until quite late. And in fact, I think it's the Orphics who were still talking about Dionysus, telling further stories about him. The story of his birth is an interesting one. His mother was Semele, whom some regarded as a queen, and others as a goddess from the Near East. And Zeus was her lover. This is one of the many whom Hera resented deeply. Zeus is chasing after nymphs and human women and all of that. I think reflects a process by which the Greek religion, which had been imported from the north with the sky god at the head of it, married itself to the local religion, which was more religion of goddesses. So anyway, whether Semele was human or divine, she was loved by Zeus, and Hera put it into her mind to make a request of Zeus. And that request, and he promised her, you know how they do that, anything you want, my dear, and then they find themselves bound by these promises. Because what she asked of him was to see him in his true form. And since he promised, he did appear to her, lightning bolt, or anyway, she was burnt to a crisp. At the time, she was pregnant with Dionysus, so the story goes. So he rescued the babe and cut open his thigh and put the embryo, the embryonic Dionysus, in his thigh. And when the baby was born, gave him into the keeping of nurses and nymphs who raised him far from the eyes of Hera. But he didn't forget his mother. And in fact, the story goes, returned to raise her from the dead and see her raised to Olympus. He has a particular relationship with the feminine. He was the lover himself of Ariadne. That story is that she, enthralled and seduced by the Greek hero Theseus, gives him away into the labyrinth, sees him safely out of the labyrinth where he slew the Minotaur, and they run away together. But then Theseus abandons her, and Dionysus finds her and weds her. That's how one story goes. And then he was faithful to her. He's supposed to be the only Olympian god with only one wife. All the cavorting with nymphs on the mountainside was not a matter of sexual carrying on, according to the stories. Here too, so the story goes, Ariadne and Dionysus are raised to Olympus, and sent to the heavens, but he takes her with him, or she goes with him. It's a little different from the Christian story. It took a long time for Mary to make it. So there's another story of that in fact she was originally betrothed to Dionysus and betrayed him with Theseus, and then was killed. That Dionysus got these goddesses, anyway, one of the other goddesses to lure her in. So her primary relationship, however you look at it, this theme, however, of betraying the god or denying the god is one that is explored in the Bacchae. The Lord of the dance is one who lives in you and you in him. And he is one who destroys the patriarchal structures and frees the woman to experience herself in her nature and in nature. In the Bacchae, he visits Thebes, where the king is outraged at his appearance and at his influence over the women of Thebes, who, after initially resisting, abandoned their looms and their babes and their household chores to rush into the mountains and participate in this Dionysian revel. The king, as I said, is outraged and he tries to imprison Dionysus, but he can't. And Dionysus, in fact, destroys, reminds me of Samson actually, destroys the palace of the king. So these structures come undone with rather dire consequences to those who have resisted the god. When it's time for the structures to yield, the structures of consciousness, we do well to cooperate with the god. And again, this potent figure, who incidentally appears in various animal forms as well, the panther and others, represents that raging free and potent sensual reality, which is a part of the spirit of the earth and has been denied a proper place, except, say, at Fasnacht or Carnival. There's a little opening made for the intrusion of this god. We have to let him in our own personal journeys, both men and women, I think, because though the risks are great, the possibilities are greater, and it's the only hope we have, really, of returning to the ground of our natures. It may not appear in this form, but I think it's one of the most well elaborated and important myths that remain to us from the Greek. We're accustomed to thinking of the Greeks as all Apollonian, but they weren't. So if you have animals in your dreams, pay attention. Hillman's going to talk about the animal powers, and I think that should be very interesting. He's been collecting animal dreams for quite a while. What can return you and validate in you the nature with which you are born? It has to be grounded in body. That's why I think those resurrection stories are important in this context. Women have dreams of Dionysian figures as well. Have you ever dreamt of a circus, for instance, or a carnival? Rock stars?
Been in a parade. I've been in a parade.
Yes.
Well, I had a dream something of a white horse stayed, but I say it's a he because it come into a man and then stayed in.
Yes.
Is that an animal symbol too?
Oh, indeedy. Yeah.
You identified the dove in the story as a male figure, and it was because
in the story it was.
In the story, it was actually a prince. Can the dove be a feminine figure ever?
I expect it could. Again, everything depends on context.
Right.
Trees can be masculine too, you know. trees can be anything. It's only clear from this story what is meant because of the context and what, the bread and the milk and the sheltering tree. Well, so have I been clear about Animus as the servant to the self? My hope is that we can begin to, not that we give up masculine and feminine gender. I don't think that'll work. It's very important and primary and early aspect of the development of personal identity, but that we open it up so that we can carry more. And therefore the recognition that whatever qualities the animus carries in your dreams is circumstantial, a historical artifact. The history of your life and of your culture have made it appropriate for him to carry those qualities. It's not that they are eternally masculine. Yeah. Exclusively, I have to say that. They're not exclusive. They are masculine, but they're not exclusively masculine.
Could you speak to then what it means in terms of integration when you have dreams of intercourse with an animus figure, as opposed to the image of the man or the job the man does or how he's acting in the dream?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean in terms of what you're actually integrating in yourself?
Well, let's play with that for a little bit. And again, this is going to vary. What is the quality of the experience for you? Is it ecstatic? What kind of man is this? Is it emerging or what? Here. Sure, if you're free to do that, yeah.
Okay. It was a dream of a man who's an analyst who lived in the house with me, but I was the only person that knew that he lived there.
Isn't that wonderful?
And there were all these people, and all day long as I was going around doing my chores, I knew that this man was waiting for me. And I was trying to take care of everyone else and please them and sneak off.
Yes.
And which I then did do. And in sneaking off, realized there was a magical floor. That the second floor was a magical floor because we could see downstairs what everybody else was doing, but they couldn't see us. But we knew what was going on down there. And so in the process, I decided whether to enter, because he was waiting for me in bed, whether to enter with my clothes on, and then I decided, no, I won't play games. I will just zip right in there with nothing on, and was penetrated. And then my mother came up. And that was the dream. But, so,
What happened, though? I mean, did you go, or
no,
was it an interference, or what?
I snuck out of bed and went back downstairs, trying to make everybody happy.
Yes.
And of course, Mother didn't know what was taking place.
Yes.
So, looking at that, I'm trying to figure out, okay, do I look at the characteristics of the man, or do I say, oh my God, I'm analyst, what am I going to do with that? Or, the magical floor and...
All of it. Yeah, you have to look at all of it, of course. The time will come, when you won't have to sneak away. I think going to be important at some point. Now, I want to ask you about the qualities of this analyst because, that's not, the specifics aren't important to the rest of us. But there's something, first of all, what does analyst mean to you? What does that title or that activity carry for you? And then the man himself, what kind of person is he? you know. A thing that occurs to me, and I don't know if it's true for you, would be a kind of authority. Certainly if you're in analysis, it's something you have to encounter and work through, that this other has authority. I mean, it's important that they do at the beginning. But here you are in intimate meeting with that kind of authority. It has also, of course, I think, to do with your eros, which has been in service to family, has something else to do for you here. Strong mothers have a more potent, of course, effect upon our understanding of what it's all right for us to be. An obviously weak or chaotic mother is easy to disidentify from, to reject. Well, I say easy, it lingers on, but I mean at least consciously we can say more readily and quickly that we better not be like that, and we can strive toward a wholeness more fully. But mother, in fact, some analyst said to me once that anybody with a real spiritual calling or something of that nature is bound to have a negative mother complex. Well, I guess I'm close to that. But to be set on the road toward oneself, sometimes the way motherhood is defined in our culture requires some distancing from mother. We have to see where we are bound to go beyond her. I think that that image in the fairy tale of confronting the dark and braving the wrath when you take your own self is a kind of an image of how you have to take it from mother. Because boys have to take it from father ultimately. First you identify with, and then on the ground it's built there, and that ground is often not built in our culture for mother and daughter. But if you have it, then you differentiate, and that requires a saying no to mother.
Is there any significance between, if your animus figure is a person who is dead rather than a person who is alive at the time you dream about it?
Yeah, there's significance to everything. I don't know what in a dream.
Oh, that would be just personal, though. I mean, it isn't just a general thing that if you dream of dead people, that as your animus, there would be a certain interpretation rather than live people.
Not necessarily a general one that I think of. Anyway, does anybody have any ideas about that?
Don't they say in active imagination you shouldn't do that with a dead person? Or a live person? Which one or the other? Some of us know here. So I was just wondering in that whether the animus figure would, if it was a dead man rather than a live man, whether that made a difference.
Let's think about that. Well, as far as the bit about active imagination goes, it's not a good idea to do active imagination with figures like that you actually are intimately associated with, whether they are dead or alive.
I knew there was something, I forgot.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, if it's a figure that is dead, that you may be impeding a certain freeing up of yourself from the attachment by keeping that person alive in your life. It can be a kind of drawing toward too. that other side, the kingdom of the dead.
And I suppose
Which
if
is
the
a little
person is
risky.
alive, it's a substitute rather than real communication.
Yeah, von Franz, again, thought that you could exert a kind of a power, too, through that, which was not a good idea. I don't know if that's true or not.
Feels that.
Yeah, possible.
But Hannah also talks about how it's easier, if someone's still alive and someone you interact with and you do that active imagination, it's easier to just get caught in the complex and keep replaying the same old stuff, as opposed to an animal or some sort of obscure dream figure or something that
Yes.
doesn't have that kind of real life connection.
Well, yes. You got
I was going to ask if an androgynous figure isn't a final kind of figure that you might be working toward in individuation, where both masculine and feminine qualities have equal strength in you. What might be? Would it be for a woman a feminine figure?
I don't know if that's the ultimate, but I think it's very important. It's as ultimate as I've gotten in my thinking of it. Anyway, yeah. I think it needs to be experienced as a feminine power, the self, in order for that flowering to occur as fully as possible.
But still it could contain masculine qualities.
Qualities we're accustomed to think of as
Yeah.
masculine, yeah. It's awkward, but I think we got to qualify that all the time now to if we're going to shift our thinking at all. Qualities we are accustomed to thinking of as masculine. Yes. You know, it may turn out that there are specific ways wherein women's logos might express itself. That feminine logos is something specific, but I don't think we know yet. Or that feminine warlikeness would be different in some way, but I don't know. There's such a heavy cultural overlay now that we don't know. We better not try to decide it right off the bat. Well, what do you think, folks? What time is it? Hot dog. Thank you very much.
No answer to that? Would be